Rishi Sunak officially joins the race to be the next Conservative leader and Prime Minister. It means the former Chancellor joins Penny Mordaunt in publicly declaring. The question now, does Boris Johnson have enough backers to stand as well?
The people who are doing the numbers for Boris's campaign tell me that they have the numbers, so the 100 that is necessary of members of Parliament are there.
Boris is an amazing figure in our party, an incredible campaigner. He lights up any room. People absolutely love him. But the problem is, as Prime Minister, we would be absolutely shackled to somebody who was bound to bring us down.
We'll have the latest on the support for each candidate. Also on the programme, the schools struggling to keep the lights and heating on. Head teachers warn that spiralling energy costs could see most schools in England run out of money next year. We're on the front line in Ukraine as President Zelensky's troops continue to take back territory from Russia. And happy birthday from the King. He sends out his first cards for those celebrating their centenaries. Good afternoon. Rishi Sunak has formally entered the contest to become the next Conservative leader and Prime Minister. The former Chancellor says he wants to lead the country with integrity, professionalism and accountability. He already has more than the required backing of 100 fellow Tory MPs and more than double the number publicly supporting Boris Johnson. Mr Johnson held talks with Mr Sunak last night but has yet to declare his candidacy. Penny Mordaunt is also running, but like Mr Johnson has yet to achieve the required number of backers. Here's our political correspondent Helen Catt.
3 potential prime ministers. 2 of them have now officially said they want the job. The former Chancellor Rishi Sunak has confirmed he is running after getting more than the 100 backers he needs. In a tweet, he said he was standing because he wanted to fix the economy, unite the party and deliver for the country.
I think I am.
Penny Mordaunt had already said she was in the race and is the only contender so far to go in front of the cameras. But she wouldn't be drawn on the detail of the policies she'd pursue.
Yes or no, do you stand by that? You said it a couple of weeks ago.
I'm not. You're trying very hard, Laura.
Her number of public backers trails those of her rivals, but she insisted she hadn't done any deals to drop out.
I am very confident about the progress we are making, and I will say to you that I am in this to win it. I think it's important for our party. We have a contest. I am very confident about our numbers. And the reason why I am doing this is because I think I am best placed to bring the party together.
Which just leaves Boris Johnson to say what he plans to do. Allies say he will run and insist he does have the numbers, despite the figure of public backers being just over half of what's needed.
Clearly he is going to stand. There's a great deal of support for him, as you will have seen. The system is that the proposer and seconder's names are made public. Other people have a choice as to whether to make their names public or not. But the people who are doing the numbers for Boris's campaign tell me that they have the numbers, so the 100 that is necessary of members of Parliament are there.
Yeah. Another supporter said Boris Johnson had promised to run a tighter ship if he went back to Downing Street. An investigation by MPs is due to start soon over what he told Parliament about the COVID rule breaking that took place there when he was last in charge.
Boris is an amazing figure in our party, an incredible campaigner. He lights up any room. People absolutely love him. And if he were, say, chairman of the party, in charge of our campaigning, he could be an incredible asset. But the problem is, as Prime Minister, we would be absolutely shackled to somebody who was bound to bring us down.
Some of the things that we want to do as an incumbent.
The Labour leader again said there should be a general election to let the public decide. There are worries among Tory MPs that Mr Sunak would not be able to win votes in the same way as Mr Johnson when the next election is called. For now, though, he is the only declared candidate who is certain of a place on the ballot tomorrow. Helen Catt, BBC News.
Well, currently the BBC estimates that 227 out of 357 Tory MPs have now gone public with their support. As you heard, Rishi Sunak has passed the key threshold of 100 backers. Boris Johnson has 57 and Penny Mordaunt 24. It's worth pointing out that these are the numbers that the BBC can verify. Others may have different information. Well, our political correspondent Damien Grammaticus joins us now from Westminster. So, Damien, Boris Johnson is still to declare. His supporters say he's got 100 backers, but it's unclear who they are.
Yes, and that is the question hanging in the air now. Is Boris Johnson going to officially enter this race? You could ask yourself, well, why hasn't he done so far? The other camp say, well, they think he's not got the numbers and wouldn't want the humiliation of putting himself forward and then falling short. His backers, as you say that he does. We know he's a showman, likes to be the ringmaster. Perhaps he's waiting for some sort of big reveal, or perhaps things are still in play. Now, it's reported that he has met with Penny Mordaunt, or had talks with Penny Mordaunt. We know that she is in no mood to stand aside. We know Mr Johnson had talks yesterday with Rishi Sunak. He clearly is going ahead. He today is picking up important endorsements, including some who you would think might back Mr Johnson, like the Home Secretary resigned last week, Suella Braverman. She warned that the Conservative Party said was divided and heading towards a wipeout. We need unity, stability. Rishi fits the bill, she said. But the number that matters will be the one that is reached by 2 p.m. tomorrow. Mr Johnson needs 100 named by then, or we'll have to stand aside.
Thank you very much. Damien Grammaticus reporting for us. Well, what do voters make of the turmoil in Westminster? Dan Johnson has been speaking to people in the Conservative constituency of Peterborough.
Here are some alternative candidates who are being put up for election.
I quite like that one. I love that one. What Prime Minister? He's a bit like Boris.
Torrential rain disrupted this morning's scarecrow contest, and politics too has been overshadowed by the new search for another figurehead.
I think it's absolute shambles, and really I'd like to see a general election so that we can choose, because I think to continually have new Prime Ministers that nobody, well apart from a minority, have voted upon is grossly unfair.
The city's MP says his constituents want Boris Johnson back, and, loved or loathed, he is the name on many lips here.
Boris got us through COVID, and I think he's, people have mixed feelings, but at the end of the day, I think he's good.
Who should be Prime Minister?
Sunak.
Rishi?
Yes.
Tell me why?
Because we don't want Boris back, do we?
We're going through a financial crisis in the country. We need someone with that kind of a thought process in terms of getting us out of a financial crisis.
So who should it be?
Rishi Sunak.
Over Sunday lunch at the Cathedral Cafe, Sherry is against the idea of a Boris Johnson comeback.
Because he lied to us and he was partying while we weren't allowed to because of the virus. And because of that, I wasn't allowed to see my dad, and he died, and I never got to say goodbye. It's not fair. So no, I don't like him, and I don't like Conservatives either.
Mark runs a window cleaning business and wants to see a fresh start, a new general election.
Yes, and I should probably vote Labour this time, but I have been a Conservative for most of my life.
Opinion polls say Conservatives should be scared of losing this area. That's why they fear a general election and why one may not be forthcoming. Dan Johnson, BBC News, Peterborough.
Well, whoever wins will have the cost of living crisis at the top of their in tray. This morning there was a stark warning from the former governor of the Bank of England, Lord King. He said whoever's in power will need to impose public spending cuts or tax rises in order to tackle inflation. Mervyn King said that central banks had got it wrong by printing money to support people during the pandemic.
I think all central banks made the mistake during the lockdown period of thinking that they should print a lot of money to support the economy, whereas in fact with the economy contracting under lockdown, that was the wrong policy. And all central banks, not just ours, but the Federal Reserve and the European Central Bank, are all facing now very high inflation rates of close to 10%.
Well, our business correspondent Mark Ashdown is here. So Mark, Mervyn King pointing the finger at his fellow bankers.
Yeah, well, he is. Look, quantitative easing, or QE, it's one of those big, scary, sort of confusing phrases, but it's actually quite simple. It's when central banks buy government bonds to stimulate their economies, but because the money doesn't really exist, you can say they are printing money. Now, it's happening all over the world. It has done since the financial crisis, but the problem, Lord King says, happened during the COVID lockdowns. Money was already being pumped into the economy via furlough to help people and businesses, but he says, egged on by economists, the banks just kept on doing it, and he said that was a mistake. and it contributed to inflation going up. Now he says it's time for politicians to front up, to start bringing down inflation with policies that lead to slow growth over many years. But they also need to be honest with the public about the scale of tax rises and spending cuts that might require. He says actually there's a case now for more money to go into public spending because of the damage done by the pandemic, but we all know cuts are probably on their way. He warns that could spell a period of austerity which could be even more difficult than the last.
Mark, thank you. Head teachers in England say that 9 out of 10 schools will have run out of money by the next school year due to the cost of living crisis and spiralling energy prices. The teaching profession is calling on the government to stand by its 2019 election pledge to restore education spending to what it was in 2010, before public spending was cut under austerity. Catherine Stancheshan reports.
An unprecedented funding crisis in education as the everyday gets more expensive. That's the warning from many who work in schools, who say the reality is stark. A recent survey indicates the burden of rising energy costs, as well as salary increases, means 9 out of 10 schools could run out of money by next September.
I know of one colleague who's been round his school and taken out all of the light bulbs that he doesn't think are essential. I've talked to school leaders that are not putting their heating on until absolutely necessary.
It comes as 13 education bodies have written an open letter to Conservative MPs, urging them to put the issue at the forefront of their minds when choosing a new Prime Minister. They say current forecasts show a £2 billion black hole by 2024, a desperate situation that will severely impact the quality of education. Steve Chalk says energy costs for the 52 schools in his academy chain have jumped from £26,000 a year to just under £90,000.
We're paying 3 times as much for our energy, even after government support, 3 times as much as we were this time last year. That means we're spending through our reserves. So that situation can't continue forever. You can't do that and survive.
The Department for Education says it's putting in an extra £4 billion into core funding this year, and that all schools will be eligible for its energy bill relief scheme. That's the extra support available to businesses and the public sector to help through the winter months. But leaders at schools like this one say it will come nowhere near to bridging the gap. The National Association of Head Teachers has announced it's balloting members for strike action over funding for the first time in its 125-year history. As the cost of living crisis deepens, schools are finding their financial balancing acts even more precarious. Catherine Stancheshan, BBC News.
China's leader Xi Jinping has secured an unprecedented 3rd term in office after his position was ratified at the Communist Party's Congress in Beijing. Mr. Xi unveiled a new hand-picked leadership team filled with loyalists. His re-election breaks with a decades-long tradition that limits leaders to 2 terms. No other Communist Party leader, aside from the founder Mao Zedong, has ever served a 3rd term. Ukraine's army claims that Russian forces are continuing to retreat from the city of Kherson in the south. Defending troops are maintaining their counter-offensives towards the west of the regional capital, and they say that invading forces are setting up new positions across the Dnipro River. Moscow has been accused of placing explosives on a key dam as it pulls out, which it denies. Our Ukraine correspondent James Waterhouse has been to some of the recently liberated villages in the area.
So the one at the front's a BMP-1. In the Kherson region, there is activity. Military movements back and forth from Ukraine's counter-offensive. A logistical artery weaving through recently liberated villages. After months of shelling, it's finally quiet. Ukraine is back in control. But of what? Communities like Kreshenivka, looted and destroyed. There have been times when 69-year-old Fedir thought he was going to starve to death. We lived under explosions and shelling, he says. Those Russians said they were liberators. In reality, they started robbing us. It's not why I'm crying. I'm crying because we spent half a year under explosions. Outside the nursery, there are holes. One from a shell and more from shrapnel. All that's left of the pupils are their names. They left long ago.
When I came here for the first time after liberation, I just stood here and cried. It is really hard.
So there's nothing left?
Alyona's own home was looted after she escaped. They took almost everything. You learn a lot about the Russian occupiers just by looking around. This school was their headquarters. Supplies and rubbish scattered everywhere. Not the footprint of a disciplined force, but of one fighting in squalor, which left in a hurry.
There are endless moments when this war feels pointless, and this is one of them. Whether villages like this are occupied or liberated, the result is the same. Communities are destroyed, but there is relief here, and a belief that people can one day heal, and those are the reasons why Ukraine continues to fight.
Liberation in this region is fiercely contested. If achieved, it doesn't bring instant normality either. But in the words of one Ukrainian soldier, what choice do they have? James Waterhouse, BBC News, Kherson region.
King Charles and the Queen Consort have sent their first ever cards to hundreds of people celebrating their 100th and 105th birthdays across the United Kingdom. Ruth Park Pearson, who served in the Women's Royal Naval Service, celebrated her century on Friday. The tradition dates back to 1917, when those celebrating big milestones were sent a telegram of good wishes from King George V. That's it. We're back with the late news at 10. Now on BBC One, it's time for the news where you are. Bye-bye.